The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
It's been a couple of days, CJ, and I still can't believe it. Mikko Rantanen is a member of the Carolina Hurricanes. That still feels really strange. It's a very massive deal. There's a lot of parts to it. Obviously, Marty Necas and Jack Drury going to Colorado, and Taylor Hall also in Carolina too, and draft picks and salary retention. We'll talk. We'll do the smart thing and go all insightful and provide all this analysis. But can we take a second and just kind of marvel over the spectacle of this trade and how big this is? Like, people are calling it an NBA trade. Like, can we take a moment to just kind of look at how massive this trade is?
For sure. And, I think what jumped out to me initially and still kind of washes over me a couple days later is we just don't see NHL teams make these kind of moves, especially a team like Colorado, which still has, Stanley Cup aspirations for this season, made multiple attempts to sign Mikko Rantanen. They love and appreciate him properly, but usually a team in that position keeps the player and calls it an own rental or whatever you want to, however you want to phrase that. I mean, basically they decide that they can't make any deal that's going to set them up better to win a cup in this year than just keeping him and then, dealing with the aftershocks of him walking out the door. The Avalanche, that's where this starts. They decided that when the numbers were just at a spot that they couldn't figure out, especially, with Cale Makar due for an extension in a couple of years, you were facing a spot where you might have three guys making like 12 to 15 million pretty quickly here, that they had to get something for Mikko Rantanen. And so they had to have that first moment where they're like, we'll actually trade this guy for us to get this trade. Now, the flip side of that equation is, I don't think a lot of teams act the way Carolina acted here either, typically. Historically. This is not what I'd call a normal NHL trade because they were willing to take him on with absolutely no promise that he's staying beyond the next few months. They obviously had to give up some pretty prime assets, especially Martin Necas, who's having a tremendous season, was the Hurricanes' leading scorer at the time of the trade. And Carolina's a team that's trying to win a Stanley Cup. And so I think that's just where I'll start on the very high level is this is just not typical of what we see NHL teams do. I do wonder, I think I've been kind of hinting at this with some of our chats, but it feels like we're heading into a period where with the cap jumping up a lot, a new CBA coming in, it just seems like the plates are shifting underneath us a little bit, maybe in terms of like we might have to readjust what we think of as normal NHL anyway. And I think that there's a lot of possibility for more kind of crazy moves. And so this in terms of an in-season trade for me is probably the biggest since the Joe Thornton deal to San Jose. I know Jack Eichel was a mid-season deal to Vegas, a little different circumstances. Obviously, he was coming off that neck surgery and it wasn't like this one where not only does that trade happen Friday night, everybody's in uniform the next day for their new team on Saturday. Just pretty surreal weekend all around.
What I want to know about Mikko Rantanen and how he took this. Like, was he truly blindsided by all of this? Like, what can you say about him in all of this?
He didn't see it coming. For the reasons I just outlined, right? Players that are that important to their team in the NHL, even if, it was no secret that talks weren't going particularly well, that they weren't getting any traction there on a potential extension. But I'm sure in his heart of hearts, he didn't think he was being moved at all. And, look, I put out a trade board the day of that trade came down. Mm-hmm. Mikko Rantanen's name wasn't on it. Obviously, if I had any whiff, if I had any inclination that the Avs were serious enough about moving him, he would have been probably number one on the board or number two or, whatever. And so, there's a couple of reasons why he was blindsided. It was kept very quiet as they went through the discussions and as they finalized this trade. But also, I just don't think a player of that caliber expects to be traded. You saw Nathan McKinnon speak to reporters. He was obviously pretty emotional about it. This guy was with the Avalanche when they flat out sucked, was part of building this organization into what it is today, one that won a Stanley Cup in 2022, one that has been the envy of the league or one of the envies of the league for the last few years, won a pile of games, could have won other Stanley Cups too, and might yet still have more in the near future here. So I don't think Rantanen saw it coming one bit, and I'm sure his head must be spinning. I mean, this is pretty big ramifications for him. Obviously, right now he's on a new team, getting used to a new life. But I mean, how he approaches his free agency now, I think potentially changes. Obviously Carolina is going to take a healthy run when the time is right at keeping him. I don't think that they made this trade at all with the idea that they're hoping he leaves and they know it's going to be expensive and all those things. But I think, they want to get him comfortable in their city and around their team and, give it a little bit of time. But at some point they're going to take a run at signing him. But, all the loyalty is gone if you're Mikko Rantanen, right? I mean, that's kind of the interesting part when we think about what could be for him on July 1st is, now he gets a chance to be selfish in a way, in a way that usually top tier NHL players in their primes don't get to be. And so, this took him by surprise. I think it helps that he has a few Finns there. It's funny, between Carolina, Dallas, and Florida, it feels like all the Finns in the league are kind of on those three teams. But having Sebastian Aho, Kotkaniemi, and others there will probably help in the short term. I mean, obviously a great place to play, a team that's won a lot of games over many, many years now. I mean, it's not as though he got traded to the 30th place team and has to get used to just a total culture shock in terms of where the organizations are at. But this caught him by surprise. And I do think he hasn't even begun to think about all that what it means. But if you and I can do that because we're not experiencing the emotion of it. I mean, there's a good chance this guy's available on July 1st. I think it's just fair to say it's no knock on Carolina. And obviously they can offer him an 8th year and they can do a lot to try to compel him to stay. But, he's got no loyalties anymore because he's kind of had his heart broken, right, to some degree. And so, this could be a major piece on July 1st, much bigger than any player, probably since John Tavares, in terms of just where he's at in his career if he does become a UFA.
How would you rate Carolina's chances at re-signing Mikko Rantanen? Very early take, I know, but worth asking.
It's really tough to assess because it's impossible to know how he's going to fit in. I mean, this is a guy that played for one team his whole career, one NHL team. He is jumping in midstream, as I mentioned. Now maybe he's someone who might actually benefit weirdly from the Four Nations break. I know he's going to go represent Finland at that tournament, but it'll give him a chance to step back, obviously be with a guy like Sebastian Aho on that team, and then come back with fresh eyes maybe on the situation. But I think it's really hard to handicap. I mean, look, here's the reasons to stay. It's a great place to live. It's an organization that is trying to win the cup every year, and they've won a playoff series, Julian, each of the last 6 seasons. So, I mean, they've done a lot right. Obviously, Rod Brindamore, I think, is a pretty popular coach among most of the players that play for him. It's a smartly run organization. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to think he might stay, but I just don't know where his priorities are going to fall when it comes out of this. And so it's sort of the way I view it. It's up to Carolina now to make it so that he wants to stay, to do absolutely everything in the organization's power to make him comfortable, to give him probably what's low-key most important is how he feels like he fits on the team, on the ice. Like, is it a place he feels like he can be successful? This is a guy that's had so much success. And obviously he's had a chance to play a lot of that time, with Nathan McKinnon, who's, winning Hart trophies beside him. So, but he's got the 5th most points of any player across the last 4 seasons. I mean, we're talking about a superstar, but he was a superstar that might've been the 3rd best player on his team in Colorado, depending on how you viewed it at any moment between Makar and McKinnon and him. And so, it's a little different situation for him in Carolina. So, I get the question, but I'm truly spitballing here. The one thing I do keep coming back to, though, is it would have been a harder decision probably for him to leave Colorado had this just played out. Just because of all the emotional stuff, his friends, the guys on the team would be texting like, "Hey, what's going on with your contract?" Blah, blah, blah. What happens? There would have been more pressure to stay there than there's going to be in Carolina. I mean, he didn't ask for this trade. He didn't. There was no one behind the scenes saying, "Hey, Hurricanes, come get him." And so, it's a brand new relationship. They've got the inside track because they get the guy. They get to show him their best side. They get to shower him with whatever he may want. But, I just sitting here now, my gut tells me he goes to free agency. But I mean, I'm not saying that overwhelmingly, because I do think Carolina at least is a very smart organization, and they're gonna do absolutely everything to keep him. It's just I'm just guessing at what's going to happen. You know, the 8th year actually. The weird thing about this system is that the fact that only one team can offer you 8 years when you're a player, especially if you're signing a long-term contract, obviously that's a huge difference. I mean, Carolina can flat out pay him more total money on the next contract than anybody, just the way the system works. And so if money is his driver, Carolina's in the driver's seat.
Very fair point. When big trades like this get announced and reported, and we see how it kind of evolves on social media, it's very likely that one player who's reported to be in the deal, they end up not being in the finalized version. There's a lot of random stuff that gets reported. There's two particular stories that come to mind from all of the nonsense from Friday night. I mean, one on a lesser scale than the other. Jesperi Kotkaniemi, you mentioned him earlier. How likely was it that he was going to be in that trade? Because there seemed to be a version floating around of him being in that trade.
Yeah, I don't know where that information came from. My understanding is he was never a part of this trade. Like there was no world that he was getting moved to Colorado as part of this deal. Now, you know, there was the alternate timeline happening at the same time where the Hurricanes were having discussions with the Canucks, you know, on two of their top players. And so, you know, I do believe Vancouver wanted Kotkaniemi in a deal if they were going to do something with Carolina. I'm not saying Carolina was willing to do that, but I think Vancouver was at minimum asking for Kotkaniemi as part of the packages that they discussed. And obviously they had two separate discussions too, because there was talks on Pettersson and separate talks on JT Miller. Wasn't going to be the exact same package either, you know, for either player, different assets, different dynamics at play there. So maybe that's partly where that came from. You know, I don't really know. I mean, the funniest part with this trade, when you think back on it, it all started with Taylor Hall being a late scratch for the Blackhawks in their game against Tampa on Friday. And so this initially was getting reported as the Taylor Hall to Carolina deal. Little did we all know at the time that Taylor Hall, you know, look, we've spoken for 15 minutes already almost, and this is the first real mention of Taylor Hall being in the deal. I know you did, you know, name check him off the top, but right. You know, he ends up being one of the sort of small, that other thing that was part of this trade was that. So it is kind of funny how that goes. I mean, I can only imagine you're sitting and you're one of the Hurricanes front office members, whether you're Eric Tulsky or what have you, and you're watching this thing start to leak out on Twitter or whatever platform you're looking at, and people are like, Taylor Hall, why are they, you know, like they're I'm sure everyone is hot taking whatever they think of the Taylor Hall acquisition, and you're like, you idiots, just wait. Just wait. I can only imagine what it must have looked like if you were in their front office suites or wherever those guys were all, you know, when they were finalizing this deal, because it must have been pretty funny to see that, you know, the string unraveling from the bottom up rather than the top down.
To your point, there's so much of this trade I have to ask you. I haven't even gotten to Chicago's role in all this, and I'm saving that. The second thing I want to get to, I know you've already addressed it on social media, but it's still kind of wild that it got to that point anyway. People thought, with the way Colorado was moving, that they were opening the door for 87 in Pittsburgh, Sidney Crosby, to go there and play with his buddy Nathan McKinnon. You shut that down, but the fact that was even a possibility, like, wow, like just goes to show the fireworks that were blowing up as this trade was happening.
The thing is, I don't think it was a possibility. I think it's, you know, a lot of people, including us on this show over probably 2 seasons worth of shows that we've at least like talked about, hey, would Sidney ever move on? If he did, where would he go? I mean, a lot of people have made the connection that they could see him being a member of the Avalanche at some point. So I think some people were just leaping to that conclusion. Like I didn't see anyone, and look, it was a crazy night, so I might have missed something, of course, but I didn't see anyone sort of credibly saying like sources say this is happening. I think it was just more like, hey, everyone just saw this as smoke. And, you know, really all I was putting out there, just because this was certainly taking on a life of its own, is I can tell you 100% that from the Penguins end of things, they're not looking to move Sidney Crosby. He's viewed as an untouchable on the roster. Yes, they're going to try to trade some other players, the Marcus Petterssons, Drew O'Connors, really everybody that isn't going to have a number in the rafters one day at the arena there in Pittsburgh is potentially on the block, because I just think that's where they're at. And Sidney Crosby, most importantly, has a no movement clause and has not signaled any desire to move on. I mean, let's call this as it is. Sidney Crosby, first of all, you can imagine how much loyalty he feels. We were talking about loyalty earlier in the pod to Pittsburgh. I mean, this guy didn't have to sign his extension in September. His team just missed the playoffs the previous 2 years. Like the writing should be on the wall that they're probably not going to be good, unfortunately, in the period of time he's got left as an NHL player. And yet he still signed that extension. So I think we have to take him at his actions here, even more than his words. He had an opportunity just to play out this season. It would have been fine. He could be also a UFA on July 1st had he not signed that extension. And he could have given the Penguins essentially this year to say, like, hey, did we bounce back? Or, what's the direction of the organization? Maybe it's time for me to choose July 1. And so, the fact he didn't do that tells you something. He's also a creature of habit. I mean, this is what we know about Sid. So in addition to being incredibly loyal, feeling, his whole adult life is based not just in Pittsburgh, but around the Penguins. I mean, he's been part of the fabric of that team. He lived with the team owner for 5 years to start his career. Like, I'm just saying, he could not be more associated with one team. And he is known to be someone who's very, he likes things a certain way. So to think, even though, yes, this hasn't been the best year again for the Penguins, that Crosby is going mid-season and asking to be traded, I don't see it happening. I did leave a big caveat in that tweet because, like, something could change, right? We still got 5.5 weeks till the deadline. I'm not sitting here saying there is a 0% chance he's traded by March 7th. I just think it's like single-digit % at best. Like, I just think it's very, 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 very unlikely. And certainly as a Friday night with the people I checked in with, there was no smoke. There was no real... Like, this was not the next shoe to drop that's already kind of being cooked behind the scenes. I mean, Crosby's a Penguin. And look, I think we're going to have this discussion again in the offseason. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, again, I do see a world where he plays for another team at some point. I just don't think that world's going to come to reality here in the next few weeks.
Can we unpack Carolina's interest in either JT Miller or an Elias Pettersson in Vancouver? And just... I can imagine it like this. Tell me if I'm wrong. Like, Eric Tulsky is trying to make some kind of big move. He's looking at whatever Vancouver's offering, and then this Mikko Rantanen package potential comes out of nowhere. Like, can you give us some kind of timeline of events on how that all kind of unfolded?
Yeah, I mean, it came out of nowhere for us. As it turns out, the discussion goes back to June between the Avalanche and the Hurricanes when, I think we have to understand something here. Not many teams would want to give up a lot of assets for a player, even a player as great as Mikko Rantanen, with no guarantee that he's staying, right? So it was already a very limited trade market. Like, I think by the end, honestly, it was Carolina only truly in on Mikko Rantanen. Of course, other teams call Colorado. They want to know what they're thinking, want to know what they're doing. Maybe some soft tire kicking, we'll call it. But, the fact that this trade has its roots all the way back at the draft time, tells you that it's been a while marinating. And I think one of the main reasons that is the two organizations saw the potential for Necas and Rantanen to kind of be big parts of it, right? I mean, and obviously there's a lot more layers to what actually, makes up the transaction. But at that point in time, you'll remember Carolina was having trouble getting Necas signed. He'd asked for a trade, so they were, exploring what a trade could look like for him. They wound up signing him to a 2-year deal, $6.5 million, I believe. On the cap hit. He's had a great season. I mean, give the guy credit with everything that went on in the offseason. He's lived up to his end of the bargain since signing back in Carolina. But, they kind of had we'll call it a problem, or they had a challenge there with him. And, the Avalanche identified Necas as someone who'd be a great fit for them because he's such a fast skater. And look at the way Colorado plays. I mean, that team is high octane, right? I mean, when you watch Nathan McKinnon, like you come away, he's like a speeding train that's run out of track. The way he just like moves around the ice, like he is, full speed all the time. And so obviously not everybody can play with him effectively, and so Colorado identified him as a player that they thought could really help their team. And so the fact that seed was planted all the way back then. I think I think that sort of tells us it was a very limited market truly for Rantanen. Again, because Colorado wasn't giving anyone the chance to talk to him. They didn't want to involve him in this. Like that gets messy, right? Because the other part of it is like, you might say like, oh yeah, like Mitch Marner, for example, he's in the same spot Rantanen was in Toronto, but he's not. Mitch Marner has a no movement clause. The Leafs can't do to Mitch Marner what Colorado was able to pull here. But Mikko Rantanen only had a 9-team no trade list. And so the Avalanche were able to trade him and blindside him because, basically they had, quick math here, 22 teams that they could have dealt him to without his permission. And so that's the timeline. And then, from Carolina's end of things, I think Tulsky is, look, the guy's a genius, like actually way more educated than basically anyone probably in the entire NHL. Yeah. But in addition to that, I think that front office operates very well. And I think it operated very well when he was under Don Waddell. When you look at their history of trades, you might quibble that they haven't taken enough big swings in the past or things, I'm not saying they're beyond some second guessing or some wondering, but, they don't make very many bad decisions, quite honestly. And so, for them, Tulsky's looking to basically raise the bar on what his team could be, right? Like when the dust settles on this, they have a much better chance of winning the Stanley Cup with Mikko Rantanen. And that's me. And Nature's a really, really good player. Like that's not hating on him, but they've moved the high end of what their team can be in the short term with this move. Right. And, at the end of the day, you call that the winner, I think. I don't know how this is all going to go. I don't know who resigns and all this. And maybe over a period of time, Nate just plays 10 more years in Colorado and you think like, hey, maybe that wasn't as bad a trade or wasn't as, but in the moment, I feel like Carolina won this deal. They've been looking to raise the bar on what their team can be. So that meant going down the road on Pettersson, going down the road on Miller. I can tell you on Friday, there were people that thought Elias Pettersson was being traded to Carolina. And so I don't know how close it really was because this is we get into a sticky, we had this discussion actually about Pettersson the week before, right? With the Rangers deal where some people felt it was really close and he was nearly held out of the Canucks lineup. But like the truth is, so that was JT Miller.
Yeah, with Miller.
I'm getting I'm getting my brain all scrambled. It's been,
we knew what you meant.
6 weeks of endless trade discussion with the Canucks and still no trades. But, there were definitely people that thought Pettersson could be getting moved. And so discussions were at least at a fairly advanced point. And it's fair to say, I don't think it was necessarily the exact same trade package, but a lot of the same kind of, Carolina had these pieces they were willing to move as much as they were difficult for them to move. And they had to be sure they were, which player they got back that it was the most worth it. And, I would say what's interesting is they definitely took the riskier path again, just because Rantanen isn't signed. And let's just say they traded for Pettersson, like just for fun.
Yeah.
And it never came out that they were really close to trading for Rantanen. Like no one would have known that they could have, like they kind of did what I love about it is they took really the riskier decision. And just because the guy isn't signed, I'm not arguing. I think straight up right now, you'd rather have Mikko Rantanen on your team than Elias Pettersson, like no question. But Pettersson signed and all this stuff. You're buying a lot more years of control with him if you were to get him. And so I don't know where this goes now for Vancouver, but, certainly Carolina had extensive discussions with the Canucks, had interest to a degree in both players, and ultimately decided that they were going to use the assets that they were willing to move to get Rantanen, that was the best way, the best path for them. And so I love it. It's a fortune favors the bold kind of move. Obviously it could backfire like any big decision a GM makes. This could backfire from the Avalanche end, right? Even as good as Natchez is, and you get a couple picks and you love Jack Jury, depth forward for your team. I don't know what this does in his dressing room. I saw the initial reaction. The core players and the team weren't happy. Maybe this year is kind of a washout. Like this is the fun. This is why GMs probably don't sleep well at night, especially this time of year when they're really working through these decisions, when they have to make a big decision. And then it's out there in the public for every idiot with a podcast to opine on what they think.
Yeah, not all of us are idiots who have these podcasts. Some of us are actually pretty smart. And of course, I'm hyping you up in this case. So if you're Eric Tulsky, do you have another bold move in you? Are you just going small between now and either the actual deadline or maybe just before Four Nations, which this one thing, small side note here, this trade happening now, one of the first things I thought of was CJ's been saying all along that people might use that time before the Four Nations break as some kind of like mini deadline. Doesn't that kind of bring credence to what you've been saying these last couple of weeks on that in a way?
I mean, I don't know if I want to take full credit for that, but I mean, yeah, maybe partial credit. I think the Four Nations break is essentially 2 weeks where I don't think we'll see trades.
Right.
And so I feel like that sets like a ledge in the season, right? Where it's like I thought that there could be a mini rush. I don't mean like 15 trades, but a mini rush of trades, between now and call it February 8th to 10th, whatever, when teams are starting to go on break. And then, obviously once we get on the other side of the Four Nations, someone's skated around with a trophy at TD Garden and, this NHL season gets going on Saturday, February 22nd. I mean, that's going to be just less than 2 weeks till the March 7th trade deadline. And so I think that's where most of the action will be concentrated. But, certainly I still think we could see a trade or more trades before the Four Nations. I just think it'll be quiet in that window. I don't see a lot of reason to get a deal. I think there's lots of reasons for GMs to talk and have phone calls and start to set up and put together the ideas of trades or really dig down on some stuff. But I don't think you're going to, on an off day in the Four Nations tournament, see a big trade made. But, I'm willing to have a mea culpa if I'm wrong on that prediction.
Okay, let me go back to the initial question because I realized I had a question and then I compounded with the side tangent. Eric Tulsky, what do you think is next for him between now and the deadline?
I think he's in a great position because he probably doesn't have to do anything. But the other beauty is he's got lots of time to see what else is out there. And I don't see any reason to stop if he can find a way to make his team better. So let's face it, this is almost certainly the biggest move the Hurricanes are going to make. This might be the biggest move they make for 5 years. Who knows? But, I don't think that at the same time that it just means that they're going to close up shop and say, hey, this is our team. And so, I certainly believe of the teams involved in this trade, Colorado is the more likely still to have a bigger move up its sleeve. The Avalanche did open some cap space with this series of moves. Arguably still have now a hole in their lineup that they may want to address. Everyone's focused on Crosby, or a lot of people are focused on Crosby. I mean, what happens if the Bruins move Brad Marchand? Maybe you're linking up those two Nova Scotia boys. I mean, I'm just tossing that out there. But I mean, I think Colorado certainly is more likely to take another decent sized swing between now and the deadline, depending what's out there. I mean, obviously they've even added a couple draft picks here, which they could use to draft players, but also, could be ammunition for trades. Whereas Carolina probably feels like it's got fewer holes in the lineup, but I think I read a quote from Tulsky is like, until you have the best 20 players in the world on your team, you don't stop looking at deals. And that's logical. That makes sense. I mean, the Hurricanes, the flip side of this, they maybe we don't give them enough national exposure at times, think about it through their lens. I mean, to have had the success they have, I mean, top team every year, winning even a playoff run every year, but they haven't been any closer than getting swept twice in the conference finals. So they've been 8 wins at minimum away from the Stanley Cup. So yes, they're like they're a high end team. Like most teams would love to have their record. Most organizations would love to have their record over the last 6 years, but eventually it gets old. You've got to do something to try to push the limits of what you can be. And so I still think that they're going to be in a mindset of really trying to improve that roster. The other thing too is when you look at it, scoring has often been what's kind of eluded them in the key moments in the playoffs. I mean, adding Rantanen, who in addition to having all those points in the regular season has been much better than a point per game player in the playoffs. He's been a consistent performer there is beautiful. And they got Taylor Hall for free in this deal. Like we haven't even gone to that yet. And look, I have Hockey DB. Like I know Taylor Hall's numbers this year, not very good. I realize he's coming off a significant knee injury last season, knee surgery, and I know his age. So there's every chance that this doesn't pay off, but he's also a player that has scored a lot, has produced a lot of offense, and maybe used in the right way he might score a big goal for them in the playoffs, put it that way. And that will signal like that alone would justify acquiring him. And I think certainly having him lower in the lineup, it just gives them a little more of that offensive element. And again, they got him for free. I mean, I still can't figure out the Chicago end of this deal.
Yeah.
And I'm not alone in that, and talking to some people around the league over the weekend, but basically, if you want to look at it, Chicago kept half of Rantanen's contract. That alone is usually worth a third. And you could argue, based on the past, should have been worth more. And Taylor Hall, who I realize, again, underperforming player, $6 million cap hit, he was not going to be easy for them to move at the deadline. Like, I am sympathetic to that. And if they moved him in their own deal, they were probably retaining half of his salary. Obviously, Carolina was willing to take him full boat in this case because Rantanen has a bigger salary. So, Chicago was holding back even more money. But usually Taylor Hall would be a third round pick.
Yeah.
So it just feels like Chicago was 1 third round pick short of this deal. I realize that they're probably thinking, hey, we've got lots of prospects and this and that. But I don't know. Seemed to me they could have held out for better as the broker team.
Yeah, I'm of the same mindset too. If you have all that cap space and you have all that opportunity to help be basically a conduit for Carolina and Colorado to make this deal work, coming out of it with having a portion of Rantanen's salary and just a third round pick, that's not enough for me. You should at least have another draft pick coming in there somewhere. That being said, they still have a ton of cap space. I wonder if they take a run at Mikko Rantanen on July 1st.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think we can immediately, if we want to jump way ahead, the Blackhawks will be in on everybody. Anyone that gets the free agency, if it's a Mitch Marner, or if it's a Rantanen, even if it's the next sort of layer of potential free agents, guys like Marchand or Tavares, or, go down the list. I don't know which of those players, if any, are unsigned on July 1st, but I think it's fair to say, especially among potentially impactful to semi-impactful forwards, will be on their wish list. And the Blackhawks have, a city a lot of players like to live and play in, and they have a lot of cap space. So I do think that they will be a pretty aggressive suitor when it comes time. I'm still not willing to let them off the hook for this trade. I mean, look, we should mention they got their own third round pick back. So Based on where they're going to finish, if you really want to twist yourself in knots, justifying things, you could say that's like a really late second rounder because it might be the first pick in the third round or second pick in the third round. But it's still, the point is they didn't have to do anything here, right? And I think there was, like I should underline, there was legitimate worry that Taylor Hall wouldn't be movable for them, that, they'd get to the deadline period and he'd still be on their roster, and that probably isn't good for everyone. I mean, as much as Taylor Hall had said publicly he wanted to stay in Chicago, I mean, a player like that wants a chance to win the Stanley Cup. But to me, if we go back to the Hurricanes on this is why they're a smart front office. In the totality of this move, and obviously all the attention's on Rantanen, they get Taylor Hall for free, essentially, which is smart. Compiling, right? Like it's a smart decision. That they needed half of Rantanen retained, but they didn't end up giving up. I mean, let's just fold that away and see what becomes of Taylor Hall, and see if, again, I don't think he's going to revert magically to Taylor Hall of 5 years ago or something like that. But I still think that's a player that's just been there, done that, and has the ability to make a difference at a key moment for them, which is what they've been missing. That's why they're in the position they're in, where they feel they need to be aggressive.
Producer Donkey Face, please clip the last 5 minutes just so when Taylor Hall scores a big goal in the playoffs, we can say, hey, we called it. One more Rantanen question for you, since it's out there. There seems to be this, not even thinking, just, was Rantanen really going to be willing to take less by July 1st if it got to that point that he was going to stay? And any idea at least how much that might have been? We know he wanted, like 14 million above? How much less would he have really wanted if he had stayed? I guess we'll never know.
We'll never know. What we do know is he was asking for Leon Draisaitl's contract. Mm-hmm. And frankly, based on the numbers he's put up, that's not an unreasonable position for him or his camp to take. Now, this is always the danger. If you're negotiating with a team and it's a team where you really want to stay, I think sometimes you have to work with that team a little bit. And this isn't me being critical. This is just laying out the reality. And, the same I would say with Mitch Marner. Like Mitch Marner can make a case and yes, the cap is shifting and say he should make X, it's the player's right to, like, don't get me wrong. But when you do that, you put yourself in a position where you're at risk, where the team says, do you know what? We just can't work with this and we gotta go in another direction. And I think that's what happened here. And so maybe in reverse, people can whisper in other people's ears and be like, oh yeah, but he would have taken less. Well, they never said that. And even if let's say, this goes two ways, but let's say he was willing to take Nathan McKinnon's exact AAV, $12.6 million, just for, First of all, we don't know for sure Colorado would even give him that. And I still think that the real problem the Avalanche were in is whether they were paying him $12 million or $12.6 million or $13 million or $14 million a year, is that they're going to have to pay Cale Makar more in a couple years. And so do you want to pay Cale 15 and Rantanen 14 and McKinnon 12.6? I mean, I'm not saying you can't win with that, but it's stretching the bounds of what's possible. It's a really tough position to be in, because the flip side is here too. Colorado traded away the best player in this deal. There's no way. Yes, they got good value back, I'd say, but they didn't get Mikko Rantanen back. And, they didn't stretch their window of contention any with this move. If anything, they've weakened their chances to win the next cup. Now, look, there's still 5 weeks. Let's see what other moves they have up their sleeves. But, they were just in a really tough spot. The decision really was between, do we just want to ride it out with Rantanen and let him walk? Or are we better served to try to get something and regroup? And I don't know. I just think that their chances of winning this 2025 Stanley Cup are lower today than they would have been if they had him on their team. But, I don't know what he would have taken. I still think, I think the bar is going to be raised with the next round of free agents. Keep in mind, we have Kirill Kaprizov on the horizon, Connor McDavid, Mitch Marner, as I mentioned, Rantanen. Between these guys, we're going to see that the numbers are going up. Like, all of those players may end up exceeding what McKinnon makes today on AAV. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if all of those players end up above 12.6. I mean, it's a no-brainer with McDavid to say that. I think it's a semi-no-brainer to say it with Kaprizov. But even Rantanen and Marner, I could see on their next deals getting more than what McKinnon's paid today. I mean, we're moving towards a salary cap that's going to take a big leap, and it might take multiple leaps, right? Like, one of the discussions being had behind the scenes now is not just for next year's cap, but how is the smoothing going to work over the next 2 to 3 seasons? That might be baked in by the time these guys are actually making contract decisions, where, the first year 1, year 2, year 3, the cap's going to this level, this level, this level. So I'm not even saying Rantanen should take less. Frankly, it's just the Avalanche kind of got caught in that, and they weren't comfortable paying him and then, dealing with the fallout of that.
Is there anything else you want us all to know about this trade that I didn't ask you to talk about?
Man, I don't even know. Like, my head's spinning, and there's so many angles to it, right? Like, that's what makes it interesting. It's a 3-team trade. It's a superstar player who's a potential UFA. It's like, there's just a lot of elements to the deal. I don't think I've missed anything that I really want to hammer home. But I'm fascinated to see, not in a couple days time, but in a few weeks time, like, how these players, and really especially Rantanen, changes. Like, how does he play in Carolina? Like, that's the unknown, right? Just the shock of this deal is very real for him. And how quickly does he kind of get to where his feet are? You know what I mean? How quickly does his brain get centered to where his skates are on the ice and get his mind around the challenge in Carolina will be fascinating for me to watch.
And I know it's not the same at all as what the New York Rangers have gone through, but I thought of them with how Nathan McKinnon reacted. And I hope for their sake that they're still able to. It's a business. You have to play through trades like this all the time. People do it all the time. But could you imagine if it is as what you kind of mentioned earlier? What if this year ends up being a wash? What if this just kind of messes up with the psyche of everyone in that Avalanche locker room? Mikko Rantanen was a long mainstay in that room. a right hand man for Nathan McKinnon. Like that's a really massive, earth shattering trade. Done.
These are
with
human
Carolina,
beings,
Colorado.
right? Like
absolutely,
they're not just cap hits, right? They're not just like pieces on a board. Like there's a human side to this. With you, how do you predict?
I don't know.
Nathan McKinnon is also that guy eats through nails on a Friday night. Like he's such a competitor. Like I don't think he's going to fold up, 10th on the season just because his buddy got traded. No. But, he probably feels inside. I doubt he'd ever say it, but like that they have a little less chance to win. And that, as much as just removing a good friend and whatever brother from the locker room is part of it. Like what your team, you need belief to win, right? Obviously you need talent to win first and foremost, but you need belief. And I just wonder if the belief has been weakened a little bit with that move by the Avalanche. And maybe that puts a lot more pressure on the front office to make use of these next few weeks, even if you're not bringing in an 8-7, but you're finding someone else that can make a big difference and can give them a shot of like, okay, we're for real here. I think that there's a psychological thing that needs to be addressed in addition to just a lineup. You look at the Avs lineup beyond their superstars, like it gets a little weak. They're much less deep than the team that won the cup. I mean, by necessity, unfortunately, Landeskog's been injured ever since the night they won that cup in Tampa. They had Nichushkin at his highest. They had Rantanen. They had McKinnon. They had Makar. Like Makar's run through that playoffs, even as young as he still is today, that might be the best hockey he ever plays. Like he was just on like a superhuman level in that playoffs. And so, those guys probably know all that because they lived it and they probably realize, hey, we're not still quite that team. And so I do think management has to try to find a way to give them that purpose or that feeling that they can be that team again.
So Carolina, Colorado, Chicago, we kind of went in a little bit on their end of this deal. I know Vancouver was not involved, but what's next for them? Because that big deal happens and we still don't know if it's either going to be Miller or Pettersson getting moved. I mean, maybe it's more likely Miller, maybe it's Pettersson. It just changes by the day, it feels like. The spotlight should be on them right now.
And it is. Look, they still have the Rangers kicking around on Miller. I think that there's still potential options with the Sabres on Pettersson. And I'm sure other teams too. I mean, you wonder, would Columbus ever want to step up and make a big deal here? Like, I don't know if that's the right timing for Columbus, quite honestly. I mean, they've had such a great year, storybook kind of year, but maybe they don't feel the need to push their chips in just yet, right? Because they still do have a young core with that team. But, I think that there are other places, Vancouver, like it's not like the Canucks have to, turn off their phones and be like, all right, well, there goes our one shot. I mean, Carolina was in there, but other teams have been having ongoing discussions with Vancouver too. And so, it sounds like it's gone a little bit quiet in the last couple of days, but it's going to pick back up again. And, I certainly think Vancouver is still probably trading one of these guys. Let's go by the trade board. Miller's number 1. I think Pettersson was number 10. Miller's more likely to be moved. I think that's probably the player they prefer to move, but maybe the deal when everything is on the table for them, maybe the deal that makes the most sense is moving Pettersson. But yeah, we still have at least one potential blockbuster still to come this year. And maybe there's a surprise out there. I mean, we've done a lot of episodes this year. There's been 4 trade boards and Rantanen wasn't anywhere to be. I'm calling us out. I'm calling myself out. Because that's part of it. Is like I just said, I didn't know. I mean, obviously, I knew things weren't going well with extension talks. Like all that was, I would say, not even an open secret. It was acknowledged, but I didn't think that trade was coming. So who knows? We still got 5 weeks, my friend. I think it's this just really like this got me. I mean, I was buzzing on Friday, and it just got me excited for this period to come because I think the Four Nations is going to be fun, but I also think it's going to be bookended by basically trade season. And then all of a sudden it's going to be March. It's not going to be as cold outside. We're going to be heading towards spring and we're going to be heading towards the playoffs. So, I mean, we're in a really sweet part of the schedule and of the season right now.
You're getting me hyped just describing all of that. Speaking of Four Nations, before I get to ask CJ, Alex Pietrangelo is pulling out of playing for Team Canada as he is tending to an ailment. So he's not going to be there at that tournament in a couple weeks' time. Why is he still playing for the Vegas Golden Knights? That doesn't make sense. That shouldn't be happening.
Well, I mean, look it's his call. You're talking about a veteran player, someone who's represented Canada in the past, and I've got no reason to believe he isn't playing hurt, as a lot of players are. He's prioritizing the Golden Knights season over this tournament, and his health and everything around that. So, I've got no problem with that. You might even see another player or two that take a similar sort of decision or tact. I don't think it'll be widespread. I don't think it's a larger concern. I think it's an individual situation here for Pietrangelo. And, this is, you wouldn't want anyone playing that doesn't want to play or doesn't feel capable of playing, right? And so think of it from his end of things. It's a long trip to Montreal from Vegas. It's a condensed tournament played at a high speed, and then you're right back into the season. Whereas I'm sure he's looking at, hey, I can take 10 days to rest my body, maybe get some kind of treatment for whatever he's dealing with, take some time with his family, and be emotionally and physically refreshed heading into the stretch drive for the Golden Knights. So, I'm not, I don't have my inspector's hat on this one. I think it's pretty clear that this is a personal decision because of the fact he's not at 100%. But lots of players are playing less than 100% right now. Some guys have been aching to get this opportunity. I mean, Alex Pietrangelo, you'll recall, won a gold medal in Sochi at the Olympics, was part of the World Cup team in 2016 for Canada. And I suspect he'll be in Italy next year when the Olympics come around too. I don't think anyone, Team Canada's disappointed to lose him. He's definitely was going to be an important part of that team's blue line, but I don't think anyone's going to hold it against him or say, well, forget this guy. Frankly, I think he'll probably be among Canada's best 7 or 8 D next year at this time, and he'll get an Olympic send off versus a Four Nations tournament Team Canada experience.
Who do you think replaces him?
I've seen all kinds of talk, and everyone seems to be missing what to me is the most obvious name. Like, what's out there? McKenzie Weegar, Dougie Hamilton, Evan Bouchard, a few others. I think Drew Doughty is the most likely player to replace him. Now, Doughty hasn't played this season. Is only working his way back into the Kings lineup. But let's not forget that Drew Doughty, has extensive experience all the way back to the 2010 Vancouver Olympics with Team Canada. And I think would have been on this team in a world where he was healthy. What's interesting is Team Canada doesn't have to name a replacement officially till February 11th. They practice in Montreal. The first practice is on February 10th. So my sense is they want to have someone named in time that person could travel to Montreal and be part of that first practice. So really, they've got to name someone by about February 7th, to be fair, probably, which means they got a little bit of time here to see how Doughty's on the verge of return for LA. And they get to watch him in a few games and see where he's at. And my guess is that if he's healthy and looks good and feels up to it, I would say he's the favorite for me. But it's admittedly, there's a big unknown here because the guy, he's had such a long layoff. He's a veteran player. So with respect to all those other names that are out there, those are all players that have never represented Canada in a best on best. There's one right shot defenseman who's done a lot of that. And I think Doughty, if he's up to the task, is the most likely guy to come.
Okay. And with that, it's time to get to Ask CJ. You ready to take in some questions?
Yeah.
Producer Drew, every time he asks a question, I try to make sure I answer it. I don't want him to get mad in the chat. He wants to know what his Avalanche could be cooking. I know I kind of asked that a little earlier, but just to kind of appease Producer Drew.
I think they're looking for a center primarily, but I don't have any good names for him, or I can't tell them exactly what it's going to be. I mean, look, they're in a much better position to make that trade. They erased the $9.5 million of Rantanen's deal. They've added Natchez at 6.5 and Drury at much less than that. I think that they're in a stronger position to make that trade. But sorry, Producer Drew, I don't have any hot rumors for you, but they're going to be in the market for another forward.
He'll take that. He's actually, as we're talking, kind of tweaking in the group chat right now about Mikko Rantanen possibly wanting less. When you get a moment, you could check. Anyway, Rock Smasher on Discord asks, what teams do you think are going to be the biggest wild cards / potential surprising traders at the trade deadline?
We're so deep. Honestly, we're so deep down that Rantanen trade. Like my brain, it's like I almost have to like zoom out.
Yeah.
Biggest surprise? I don't know. Who's a surprise? Everybody makes moves this time of year. I mean,
also look at what the Eastern Conference is like right now for those playoff spots. There's a ton of teams who could be buying to try to get a leg up. There's a ton of teams who could be. I don't know about a surprise.
yeah, but I guess I think if any of those teams were aggressive buyers, that would be a surprise. Because as much as getting in the playoffs is certainly like a step that a lot of those teams want to take. Obviously, it's good for their teams. They get some home playoff dates, which is revenue. Right. They can say we've taken a step forward. Like I don't see any of those teams, even in a wide open year. It's hard to imagine any of those teams making a run to the Cup final or something like that. So I think you have to be smart if you're in Montreal or Ottawa. Like look at Pittsburgh's in that cluster. I'm pretty confident, as I mentioned, that Pittsburgh's going to be selling at this deadline. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I don't have a good answer. I'm sorry. I'm still like my brain is shattered from this Rantanen talk, and I don't have my mind fully around the market. I mean, look, the buyers are sort of obvious to me. Vegas is going to be a buyer. Look for them to get some forwards. Dallas is going to be a buyer. They need to replace Tyler Seguin. They have Tyler Seguin's money on LTI. I think that they could get a right shot D as well because they never really truly replaced Chris Tanev after he left as a free agent. Mm-hmm. You know, teams like Edmonton, I still think will get another D at minimum, and we'll look at forward upgrades. You know, the Leafs, it's been talked about. They want another center. I could see them getting a D. I mean, all the teams at the top of the standings are going to be, but I don't see a lot of surprises yet, I guess, is my point. And the teams that are going to sell, like, you know, if Vancouver and Buffalo end up hooking up on some Pettersson blockbuster, I just don't even think that's a surprise because Buffalo obviously is floundering again. Like they have to do something. So I'm sorry I'm taking this question like way too literally and my brain is fried, but
stop apologizing. Stop apologizing, my guy. Like you've done incredible coverage on this story. Like it's all right if like the brain short circuiting a little bit. Maddie from Blue Sky asks, for both of you, would you prefer the actual trade deadline be earlier in February, closer to around the time the NBA's trade deadline is? Maybe the GMs make all the trades before March. Much gratitude.
No way.
You'd rather it as it is now.
What I love about the NHL trade deadline is that teams, it's 6 weeks from the end of the regular season. So it's in the CBA, give or take a couple days sometimes, but it gives the market a chance to take enough shape. Like the earlier it is, the more teams would be kind of in the middle. Like, are we buying? Are we selling? I think by having it later, there's more action. Look at it. You might make an argument it would be better for players because they're not moving with so little time left on the season or whatever. But if we're just talking about like purely would the trade deadline be more entertaining? Would be there more moves, more interesting moves? I think the NHL has it right because, you know, there's so many teams that are kind of in the mushy middle. And at least the later it is, it gives those GMs basically more data on their team, more of a clear mind where they're headed.
From Dr. Sun on Blue Sky. Oh, by the way, I am in agreement with CJ. Whatever gives me the most news.
You say data or data?
You could say both, technically, can't you? Data? You can say both.
I just said data and it didn't sound right. Should I say data?
You could say either. Data's fine, data's fine. As long as you don't say data. Data is not
data.
What you should be saying. Data. That's not data is fine.
Is data how it's pronounced in Quebec or
no? Actually, that's a good question. I'll look at that later. Dr. Sun asks, should the Oilers add a bodyguard type player for the McDavid line for the playoffs that can engage with players like Connor Garland? This could give Connor McDavid more freedom to do his magic instead of being pinned down to the ice without any penalty being called. Love the heated discussion this week. By the way, a lot of people have been reaching out with feedback on the episode that Siege and I had where we talked about the Connor McDavid suspension.
Are they wondering if we're like still talking after that or something? Did people think we were like seriously mad or something?
No, I think the comments have been more like, "Oh wow, it's cool that that you guys had a heated discussion." And it's been fascinating to see people be like, "Oh, like I agree with Julian. Oh, I agree with CJ." Like it's been really cool seeing the feedback. So I just want to shout out everybody and say we appreciate it.
I can't believe anyone agreed with you, but let's not get lost in that fact.
Hey. There's a lot of people who disagree with you. There's a lot of people who disagreed with you. I'm not even going to tell you some of the comments I saw pertaining to you, sir. Don't get me started on the stuff I saw about you. Man, you know what? Forget it. Let me move on. Actually, no. Should the Oilers add a bodyguard?
I don't think they need a bodyguard for Connor Garland. I think the questioner was like having fun with that because Connor Garland is my height. So I'm not sure they need a bodyguard. No, I'm going to say they don't. There's still a role for physical play. There's a role for intimidation. There's even seems to be a small role for fighting, but you don't see a lot of fights in the playoffs. And frankly, a lot of the quote unquote fighters in the league don't even suit up when it comes to those playoff games because the games are so important. So I don't think that the Oilers need that. The Oilers might need some things for their team to have a better chance to win, but they were one goal away from winning a Stanley Cup. I think that they have the right team mindset. I think they dig in together. I'm not opening the door on this whole McDavid thing again. The best thing we can say is he served his 3 games and he's back in the lineup on Monday.
Okay, I got 2 more questions for you. From Charlie. As Steve Dangle said in the SDPN trade video, would the Toronto Maple Leafs be happy with the package the Avalanche got for Rantanen if it was offered for Mitch Marner? This is a thinker.
I don't think the Leafs are trying to trade Mitch Marner. So, it's kind of a different thing. If I don't think the Leafs would do better than that trade package, if that's what the question is. I mean, the thing with Natchez is you could play him presumably with Matthews, right? You could put him in Marner's spot. He's not giving you everything Mitch Marner does. But then you've also added Drury, who can, be a future piece under team control, younger guy as a center. I think that the Leafs can live with that, but they're not trying to trade Mitch Marner. So, I mean, it's too hypothetical for my liking. I still believe ultimately Mitch Marner wants to be in Toronto and the Leafs want him to be a Maple Leaf. If there's a breakup or a breakdown, it shouldn't happen in this case. We're talking about someone, if you look at it, in the moment, it's hard to appreciate this, but Mitch Marner is a top 5 all-time Maple Leaf already. He's from the area. He's going on stage with Kygo and I just think he likes everything about his setup here. Obviously, there's been criticisms. There's a lot that's gone on, blah, 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 blah. You strip that away. I just can't believe he wants to go move and play somewhere else. And as much as I think it's a complicated deal to negotiate, the Leafs are obviously going to try to keep the number as low as possible. Mitch's representatives are going to push for Draisaitl plus or whatever. I think ultimately the Leafs window of contention is Mitch Marner and Austin Matthews being on the same team. That is the window. So I just don't see how anyone benefits from him playing anywhere else. I guess the wild card now is, and this is purely hypothetical, but if Rantanen becomes a free agent and the Leafs thought he might want to play in Toronto, would you choose Rantanen over Marner straight up for the same sort of contract? That's an interesting discussion, but there's way too much. I'm not saying we're in a dangerous zone here. None of that's reported. That's just us sitting around spitballing things that could happen in the future. I
think you've said enough for producer Drew or producer Donkey Face to clip it up for social. They like to have at least one Leafs clip or something. I'm just kidding. Daniel Burt asks if the Blue Jays sign Pete Alonso and Max Scherzer, will CJ go to at least one game next season? I know the answer to that question.
The answer is still no. Mm-hmm. But I will be watching more games on TV than I planned on if they actually make a couple more moves and build a team worth watching. But I'm still a man of my word, and I still don't like this front office, and I'm on a CJ hunger strike of sorts, although I'm eating really well these days. But I'm just saying I'm on a not buying Blue Jays tickets strike until some things change in the front office.
Big Money Siege, incredible work as always, whether on the Mikko Rantanen trade or on this show. My guy, you killed it. Give yourself some time to let your brain decompress after this weekend. Please.
Yeah, I didn't even tell you about my weekend.
Yeah. So, where were you when you heard about all of this? Or what can you tell us?
amid all of this, I'm presently in Charleston, South Carolina, where I traveled to run a half marathon. But it just so happened that Charleston got snow. The locals told me for the first time in 7 years. I don't know if that's 100%. I don't know if that's 100% accurate. I didn't fact check that, but that's what someone told me actually in the grocery store when I was buying some snacks at the Publix. But and so the half marathon that I came here to run got canceled. And so I joined about 100 plus other people that were in town that organized their own race. And we ran the course on Saturday. But it wasn't the official half because the half itself got canceled by this weather event. So then I was up very late Friday night, naturally covering the trade, writing an article for The Athletic. So I ended up doing that half, but on very little sleep, on very icy roads. And it was like a rogue half. It was actually really cool. Really cool, the spirit of the people to still get together and run it. Like all these like random people. Like one guy was down from New Hampshire. There was a group of younger people than me that they came down to Atlanta with their dad. Anyway, it was really, really kind of neat that we still ran the race. But it's been a weird weekend, is all I'm saying.
Yeah.
I landed on my flight, I look at my email and they're like, Charleston half marathon canceled.
No.
So I was already here. I was already here. Like there's nothing. Like for me, there was no decision.
Yeah.
Like if I got that email a day before, I actually could have canceled my flight. I booked flights that could be changed because I never know in a season what's going to be going on. But obviously, the other thing is I've been training. Right, I've been doing lots of long runs over the holidays, so I wanted to be ready for it. So anyway, weird weekend, but still got the 21.1 kilometers done in Charleston, and actually a really cool city. My first time here. Good eating and drinking town. And headed home this morning.
All right. Well, congrats on the run. And if any of us in the group chat ever end up in South Carolina, you'll be our first point of reference. So please send us those recommendations.
We made the local news too.
Really?
Yes, about like these rogue runners still running the half, even though the evil race organizers canceled it on them at the last second.
Did you let yourself get interviewed? Would you let yourself get interviewed for those local news stories? Would you pull like a Jerome McGinley and just be like, local man?
I would do that.
Yeah, I totally see you do that.
They didn't ask me, but I would have. But I'm in some of the, like, they have B-roll shots of us running the streets, and I'm in some of the shots. So, like, I was in the piece, I guess, in a sense, but no one asked me to be interviewed, but I would totally do it. Did you ever see the one where Alex Ovechkin did it at like a gas station? There was like a big snowstorm in DC. Yeah, there's a big snowstorm in DC, and Ovechkin was like getting gas, and they were just talking about people like whatever stocking up for this big storm, and Ovi did an interview, and they didn't know it was him. So it's same deal as the Jerome McGinley one you're talking about, like just a man on the street interview, and they didn't realize they asked someone who gets interviewed all the time.
Chris Johnston, local man, just no one assumes who he is.
I came from Toronto. I spent all this money, and there's no race.
I've trained for months. I should be
actually
here.
have to say this. I should say this. Having run the course, it was there's so much black ice. Like they're just not equipped. First of all, this is the low country, right? So like water itself doesn't really drain in the same way because you're basically at sea level. But they're just not equipped to like clear the streets the way we are in places that routinely get snow. So like it was very, very dicey, a lot of the course. And like you couldn't have really run the race like in an official capacity. So I'm actually sympathetic to the organizers having gone out and run the course. I'm like, I get why they couldn't have had thousands of people doing this. But it's also funny. The flip side of that is someone who runs outside in Toronto all winter. Like it was it was the nicest run I've had in weeks. Like it was warm relative to what we get, and there really wasn't that much snow, but it was very icy.
Well, I'm glad you were safe. Subscribe to the podcast. We'll be back on Thursday with a brand new episode. Before we get out of here, last word for you. Give me your very early Super Bowl prediction. Eagles and Chiefs.
Eagles 3-peat. Or Chiefs 3-peat.
Chiefs 3-peat. You tried it.
No, I can't cheer for the Eagles. I just can't.
I know you can't. If it was going to be Eagles Bills, I was prepared for an all Super Bowl hate off for both of us because both of our division rivals would be in the Super Bowl, and we could not cheer for those teams.
I feel bad for Buffalo. Like the Chiefs are just so freaking good. The Chiefs never beat themselves ever. But I really wanted the good people of Buffalo and all my friends that are Bills fans to get a chance to see them in the Super Bowl. And that's a heartbreaking way to go down.
I'm a hater. I don't care about Buffalo. Have a good day, everybody.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.